Hello, this is Chase Bailey of Left Bank Films. Our third episode of our podcast, The Love of Film, deals with our favorite directors of the 1940s. Our podcasters tonight include Freeman Fletcher, Todd Hunter, Dennis Collins Johnson, Brigitte Abreu, Kate Jurdy, and myself, Chase Bailey. Thank you. I hope you enjoy it. So I will start it out tonight with my number 2 pick of my favorite director of the 1940s.
Okay. Dun, 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 dun.
And my number 2 pick is John Huston. John Huston, who did Treasure the Sierra Madre, Key Largo, Maltese Falcon, etc. I also have a long list of how many films. I mean, these guys did a lot of work in the 40s. And I was really impressed with all of them, especially John Huston. I think he did an extremely good job with Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Key Largo, Maltese Falcon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my number 2 pick.
Did anybody freeze besides me on that one?
What?
Everybody froze for about 10 seconds.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, everything's fine now, but boy, I thought it was the Twilight Zone all of a sudden. But
Oh, really?
You can hear Todd. Everything else doesn't matter.
Wow, it is.
Okay.
I
No
didn't
pressure,
see
Todd.
anything or hear anything.
Not at all.
I have no idea what you said, but go right ahead.
Okay. Any comments on John Huston?
I mean, no. You know what? Why don't you go first, Freeman?
He made some
Thank
great
you,
movies,
Freeman.
and he's made a lot more that I've been meaning to watch for a long time. But Key Largo's great, Maltese Falcon's great. Great pick.
Great pick. Well, thank you very much. Now,
3 thumbs up.
now, Brigitte, will you give your number 2 pick?
Well, my number 2 director is Hitchcock.
Okay.
He was going to be on the list. I didn't know if he was going to be number 1 or number 2. It seems like such a hard call. But I love all of his films, and the ones in the 40s are, they're still infused with his style, even though my favorites aren't in the 40s. But for example, Spellbound, he's just so creative with the way that he uses a camera, and I don't know of any other director at that time that was using it the way that he was. I don't know, this might be a spoiler, but there's a moment in Spellbound where a character turns a gun on themselves, and you see it in the camera, like the gun turns and points at you, the audience. And it's just so exciting and visceral. And
I don't remember that scene.
Yeah, it's right at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Spellbound, I mean, Hitchcock was an honorable mention for me. He didn't make the top 2.
Interesting.
But I mean, he got so much better in the 50s and 60s.
I agree. And that's why it was hard to say for the 40s, because the only other one he did in the 40s was in Cities. What was it called?
You got to think about.
I should have brought up my.
You got to think about Shadow of a Doubt, blah, 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 Notorious.
Mm-hmm. Notorious, that's what it was, not Insidious.
Yeah.
Notorious, yeah. That's fantastic as well. Just I don't know, I've always been in love with the kinds of stories that he told, and that includes this decade, even though I agree with you that his style didn't really crystallize until later. But it's just really exciting. I think he has a very visceral way of telling a story. You can tell he knows what he wants. I mean, he was famous for that, for knowing the pictures exactly. And you feel it. You feel it when you watch it, which is what makes it such a good, I don't know, he's just perfect for the thriller, suspense. It's just...
He was one of the best.
Yeah, chef's kiss to
talk
Alfred
about
Hitchcock.
his overall his overall oeuvre.
Yeah.
He was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
He did that extremely well. And like I said, Hitchcock did not make my top 2.
Yeah,
But
but
he
this
was
is good.
definitely
This is
not
why
in
we
it.
have so everyone gets mentioned. And I know you'll have an actress in yours who is not in my top two. So
So Todd,
Yes.
your number 2 pick.
My number 2 pick. Okay. Just give a little disclaimer, because as Kate and Chase know, I love disclaimers. I had to focus in terms of directors. I had to focus on, especially as we're going into like eventually the 50s and the 60s. Some of my favorite directors will be popping up again and again, and I want to focus on decades that I think certain directors were the strongest, at least as I considered it.
Yeah.
So, for example, like Brigitte brought up Hitchcock. I will probably eventually bring up Hitchcock, but not in the 40s in terms of his output.
I agree.
So I really
I
tried to.
agree, Todd.
What's that?
We're both agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Well, hey. So
What else? What else could it be?
I'm taking what I can.
Which is rare for Chase. So take Chase doing that. Like
Boy, she is blasting me tonight.
Yeah, she loves you. So, with that said, my number 2 for the 1940s was Michael Curtiz. For 2, and I am pronouncing his last name correctly, right?
I always pronounce it Curtis, but I don't know.
It's
Okay.
Curtiz. No,
I
it's
think that's how it's pronounced. It's Curtis.
it's Curtiz.
Curtiz?
Yeah.
Okay. Dennis would know. He's older than
I would know, but I'm just guessing. But I sound like I know. No, I believe it is Curtiz.
Chase, I don't think he heard that.
You know what? I'm gonna help everybody right now and double check the pronunciation, because if people are going to be watching this, then we should at least know what we're sounding like. Michael Curtiz. Curtiz.
It's Curtiz.
It is, yeah, it's Curtiz. Okay, great.
Okay.
So, but I
This
thought
is all staying in.
I'll please let it all stay in.
Not at all.
The reason being is Casablanca and Mildred Pierce. Those are the 2
Yeah.
films for me. Casablanca, I could go on and on about the importance of it as a film, but also when it comes down to it, I'm not sure you can pick out the best example of 1940s studio filmmaking than Casablanca. It's just one of the pinnacles. It's a great movie you can watch any day of the week. It's timeless, even though it's very much of a particular time. And Mildred Pierce, you have the lead performance, by Joan Crawford, and it takes a woman's perspective in a period of time that the perspective wasn't really given a whole lot to women performers at the time. And Joan Crawford is such a strong performer, and the plot of the film is so captivating, I've always thought. And the fact that Michael Curtiz could take 2 different types of films like that, not let alone the rest of the films that he was doing in the 1940s, but to take 2 films like Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart, real man's man being the lead, and then you have Mildred Pierce with this very strong women lead. It's I think he was very groundbreaking in the 1940s in the films that Michael Curtiz directed. So that is ultimately why I'm choosing him for number 2.
Yeah, the other thing that Curtiz did, it's going to take me a while to remember to say correctly, but he did Yankee Doodle, and and that direction, even though I didn't like the film, it was so over the top, but he handled the musical really well.
He operated in a lot of different genres. He was a very, very strong filmmaker.
That's why I like
Houston.
He's also responsible for. Sorry.
Go ahead, Fran.
No, I was
Uh,
finished. Go ahead.
He's also responsible for one of the best shots of the 30s, which is in the sword duel at the end of The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn.
Oh,
I mean, shit, he made the Robin Hood movie that he made like one of the first and to this day the best Robin Hood movies. So it's only been rivaled by an animated Fox since. But yeah, there's a great shot during the climactic duel with Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone, where they're fighting and they sort of fight out of frame, and their shadows are cast on this large pillar as they duel past it, and then they duel back into frame. And
wasn't it on a circular staircase?
well, that's part of it. It's a very long duel.
Yeah, it's a very long duel. I enjoyed the hell out of that scene.
Oh yeah, Avengers of Robin Hood.
Ridley Scott is going to pop in and say "fuck you" to Freeman about that.
Well, I'm gonna say fuck you back to Ridley Scott, 'cause his movies
Fuck you,
this
I mean,
year
but-
alone. Whew.
Okay, Kate, it's your turn. Number 2.
So number 2 would be Frank Capra.
Nice.
How can you not, right? I mean, he kind of dominated the 30s, 40s, and 50s in a way with American cinema. I mean, we talked about, I think Arsenic and Old Lace was my number 2, right, for comedies. And Meet John Doe, I saw a real long time ago, so I would need to revisit that. Also, It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, the list goes on. His films, and I think we touched on this too before, that the films of the 1940s were very progressive. They were they're oftentimes compared to what the films of the 70s kind of brought to the front, and was kind of, experimental. It was a little bit freer. It wasn't as conservative as say what the 50s and maybe early 60s brought to the table. Though I feel like there's films in there too that kind of pushed the envelope. But I love the films of the 40s, just like the 70s in a different way. And I would say the 70s is probably my favorite decade. But yeah, Frank Capra. Anyone want to add anything to? I know we all love him.
That was a fantastic choice.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite 1940s films, which we've touched on before, is It's a Wonderful Life, and it's funny. I was actually playing it not too long ago in my house, and there was a comment made while I was playing it during the whole scene where George Bailey is like having his meltdown, after he goes home that night and he's afraid he's going to jail, and and he lashes out at the family. There was a comment made in my house of, man, that's getting dark, like it still hits today in terms of the emotions that Capra can elicit out of a scene, and I think Capra gets kind of a broad rap about being overly sentimental and almost like melodramatic. But I've never really felt that way about him as a filmmaker. I think he, as one who was in the war and saw the horrors of war and what it can do to the human spirit, I feel like he's a filmmaker that understood the human experience, and he didn't see any need to gloss it down one way or another if things get rough or if things get emotional. He went there, so I think history's actually been very kind to Capra, where initially, as you know, It's a Wonderful Life bombed when it came out.
It did?
It destroyed the studio. Yeah, the original studio. I forget which studio it was. It
wasn't RKO?
I don't think it was RKO. I think it was Liberty Films or something.
I don't know.
But it sank the studio. which there's a whole nother story as to how It's a Wonderful Life got into the public domain. But I think It's a Wonderful Life is one of the greatest films of the 20th century. So I'm all there for Kate's pick.
You got it.
Yeah, I agree, Todd. And you've touched on a really good point about, because I have a tendency, I mean, not in film, but just in general, and to kind of block out bad things. It's just how my mind acts and works. And so it's interesting and true that you brought up the fact that he does go there. Like a lot of people remember the sentimentality, you know, the famous kind of Capricorny is his nickname. And, you know, I just think in general, he isn't afraid to, and it does get pretty dark. It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, parts of Arsenic and Old Lace get pretty dark too as a comedy. So yeah, you bring up some really good points. And I think that his films are relevant. They're still completely and totally relevant today, which is the sign of just true greatness on many levels, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And he did, by the way, produce and direct a lot of war movies. So
Interesting.
Very active.
Well, it's interesting. And I wonder with the mentioning of the bombing of the tanking of It's a Wonderful Life. And I know it was more the 60s and 70s with the emergence of the Hollywood New Wave, American New Wave cinema. But I'm wondering if that was kind of the beginning of his kind of demise too. I hate to use it in those terms, but, you know, there was challenges in his, ultimately, you know, he stopped making films, but his heyday was 30s, 40s. He had some films in the 50s, but I'm wondering if that was the start of the kind of downturn of Capra's films and do you know about any of the history of that, Todd?
I don't know.
No, neither do I.
I'd have to look it up. I wasn't aware. And
another one I want to mention also, but not from the 1940s, because was Lost Horizon. I loved and that also, it takes in the whole gamut of emotions and exploration with life. And that's a great one. If you guys haven't seen it, it's 1937.
Well, we're going to see that one.
Ronald,
is that the Shangri-La?
Yes. Yeah, Ronald Colman.
Yes, I remember that. I have to go back and relook at it because it's been 100 years since I've seen it.
I think you would love it again, Chase.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. Freeman, number 2.
So my number 2 also comes with a disclaimer, so follow your lead, Todd. Late last year, I tried making a short film that it kind of went terribly, the production, due to COVID. And
you too?
And it was a really kind of bittersweet experience. But one of the things afterwards that really charged me up was watching on the new incredible Criterion Citizen Kane release, was watching Roger Ebert's commentary track about it, which just touches on my number 2 pick, Orson Welles, and how this was like his first real movie, and just how much care and every shot, every little detail, there's something fascinating to learn about it. And it was just a really I was really jealous because he was younger than me when he made it, so fuck him. But it's an incredible movie. And also Orson Welles' other movies from the 40s, like The Magnificent Ambersons and Lady from Shanghai, which were kind of notoriously, all of his movies, I think, after Citizen Kane, because Citizen Kane was such a nightmare and Orson Welles was such a nightmare, were chopped to pieces. But I think it is sort of a testament to him that they remain thoroughly watchable movies. They're not perfect. He was never able to do Citizen Kane again because he never had that level of control again. But yeah, just a really terrific 40s run, and a really terrific commentary track. I'd recommend everybody. I think it's been on like every release of Citizen Kane ever. So I would recommend listening to it. But yeah, Orson Welles is my number 2 pick.
Fantastic pick. Fantastic filming. Any other comments? I don't think we need to comment on that. Orson Welles.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, he's
Cool thing about Orson is all those 40s films, with the exception of Emerson's where he's narrating, is he's acting in them too. I mean, really, to be a great director and act in your own films is really, really tough. I haven't done a lot of that, but I've certainly directed myself live and acted, and it's hard. But the fact that he could pull all that off and continually, on into the future as well, that sets him apart from everybody else, as far as I'm concerned. When you're wearing 2 hats and you do them really great like that, that tends to elevate both of them, I think.
Yeah, loved him. He was one of the first directors that we studied in my film studies class, and we saw the Ambersons and Citizen Kane on the big screen, which was pretty cool. And I've got to be honest, Freeman, that's a great pick. I actually need to go back and visit more of his 40s films.
Yeah, me too. Those are like the 3 that I've seen, but they're a lot of fun, all of them. And even when he isn't directing, he's acting in stuff like The Third Man, where he plays like one of the greatest movie villains ever. So yeah, just a tour de force of talent, but especially as a director.
Well, I still, it's like, even though I didn't select Citizen Kane for my favorite film of the 1940s, even though it really is, Casablanca and Citizen Kane I left off my list for obvious reasons, because they're my 2 favorite films of ever. Citizen Kane still to this day is, every time I watch it, and I've watched it multiple times, I see nuances of the cinematography and the direction, just seeing the depth of some of the shots that Orson did, with Joseph Cotten, way back in the distance, and then the levels and depths of the light and shadows.
Yeah.
It was so amazing to me. Every time I see it, I go, wow, how did they do that? And it took a hard director and a cinematographer to work together to get that done. It's still an amazing film every time I see it.
And on top of everything else, I mean, as Orson Welles is director and actor, Citizen Kane, Amberson, Stranger, Lady from Shanghai, Macbeth, on top of that, he's in his 20s. I mean, come on. John Ford was directing when he was born, when Orson Welles was born. So for him to pull all that together, I mean, it's pretty tough to vote against Orson, whatever you're talking about.
Yep. Well, Dennis, you're on next.
Well, I had to, there's so many choices, and when they're limited to 2, I think we started out with 5 choices, didn't we? With back with films and stuff.
No, it was always 3.
Well, I hallucinated on 5 then. But anyway, I had to discard just for my own purposes, Capra, Chaplin, Curtiz, and Hawks. All great directors, and why would you discard them for anything? But since we're limited, then as happened last time, I kind of have my favorites in front of me, and I kind of pick at the moment what is going to be second and first, because it's so hard to choose. So I do it under pressure. But John Huston certainly was a good choice, but I can't pick him as second. He may bubble to the top, but it's pretty tough to beat Maltese Falcon, Treasure of Sierra Madre, and Key Largo. I mean, they're 3 of my favorite films anyway. But having said that, I think I'm going to go with number 2 with Preston Sturges.
Oh,
Because Preston Sturges had a great, fairly brief career. He, I may have mentioned before, the first time I saw one of his films, which was The Palm Beach Story, I was doing shows in Philadelphia, and we had a hotel room for the night, and it was on the cable that the hotel offered, and I'd never seen it. I didn't know about him, and I watched that, and I went, "Wow, that's great." And then I read about him and found out he only did like 6 or 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 7 worthwhile films that are actually great, each one of them. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to watch those all at once, and I spread it out over 15 years. I'm careful not to watch them all, even though I was really interested. Palm Beach Story, I think, is still my favorite because it was the first one I saw. But Preston Sturges, started out as a writer, and he won an Academy Award for was it The Great McGinty?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what he did was he actually he directed. What was it? He gave the screenplay for $1 to the studio if they'd let him direct, and that got him into directing. So that was a pretty sharp thing to do. But another thing I really always identified with him was he went up like a firework and came down like a dead firework. He
Wow.
he ended up broke. The IRS basically pauperized him, and he died broke and pretty much unappreciated, except by people who remembered his films. So I have to make him number 2.
Well, Lady Eve was one of my favorite films.
Yeah. His comedy, I just have a quote here from him. His golden rule for successful comedy: a pretty girl is better than a plain one, a leg is better than an arm, a bedroom is better than a living room, an arrival is better than a departure, a birth is better than a death, a chase is better than a chat, a dog is better than a landscape, a kitten is better than a dog, a baby is better than a kitten, a kiss is better than a baby, and a pratfall is better than anything. And there's some good rules for comedy, because I love doing comedy. I love comedies. I think that's my favorite because they're nothing wrong with dramas, and I love those too. But they're more uplifting. If you when you laugh after you've laughed for a while, you feel better than after you've cried for a while. Let's put it that way. So good old Preston is my number 2. I could have picked him as number 1, but the competition is real stiff. So so there you have it.
Well, fantastic. Okay. My number 1 pick as best director is Michael Curtiz.
Nice.
Well, I have to, because of Casablanca. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I just have to. Mildred Pierce, again, a good film, but Casablanca, I think he knocked it out of the park, and nobody expected it.
Yeah.
Nobody expected it. But, the cast, the way he melded the cast together, the way he moved along the story, using Humphrey as his centerpiece, but he really moved the story along from start to finish. And the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 just was so well done, and it just flowed as a story, and you felt the pain and agony of the romantic between Ingrid and Humphrey during the film, and We'll Always Have Paris. It's just one of my favorite films of all time because of the story and the way it's told, and the way it's shot.
Directing something when the writers are desperately writing something the night before that's going to be shot the next day. I mean, that's improvisation in a lot of ways. You're not
It was
to decide shots and stuff. It's like, and not even how the ending. So how do I direct the actors? I don't know if Humphrey's going to lose the woman or gain her, or she's going to you don't know what the heck's going on. So even more kudos for that.
Yep. Just everything. I like the way that the French policeman for Casablanca, I've forgotten the actor's name. I should slap myself in the face for not remembering his name, but I am 75 years old. So,
well, as Gene used to say, I'm old. You'll forgive me. Yeah.
The whole thing came together for me. And we've already spoken about Casablanca and Curtiz. So what is your number one?
Yes. So my number one director is Frank Capra, to no one's surprise.
No one's surprised.
No one's surprised. I think it's funny because I hadn't heard the term Capricorny until Kate, I think, is the one who said it, that his films are kind of like sentimental and, you know, corny or whatever. But that's my shit. So I no apologies.
No apologies necessary. And I've never
No.
heard Capricorny.
Right? Yeah.
Did Kate say that?
I was kind of insulted. I was like, I love him. So I guess
He
that was
did
something he was
Arsenic and
known-
Old Lace. He did
Right.
he did a lot of war movies too.
Yes, he did. And yes, he was very involved in the sort of like American propaganda
Yeah.
after the war, of like trying to, you know, educate people on our viewpoint of the war and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I don't know, just the way that he tells a story in the same way that Alfred Hitchcock is like perfect for his genre. I think Frank Capra, just the way that he tells the story, it's like glass. Like you can see right, you know what I mean? Like it's just such a clear picture. You're not being confused by things. You're not getting, there are no flaws. You know what I mean? It's just this beautiful, let me present you with this picture of this story and these people and what happened.
It'll
And
Take a Wonderful Life. I mean, the way he
It's- yeah.
dissected that film and told the story was so, it was methodical. It
Yeah.
was logical. It was,
yeah.
like you said, glass.
Yeah.
I like
yeah.
that analogy.
Yeah, and it helps you to look right through at the picture, and it's not like he doesn't muddy the waters that they may appear deep, you know. He just keeps it to what it is, and it hits me every time. It's
Yeah.
tugs on my heartstrings. He reaches through the ages and tugs on my heartstrings. Every time. So I make no apologies for Frank Capra being my
You
number
don't
one.
need to. You don't
Thank
need
you.
to. Frank Capra was definitely, well, I told you, was one of my honorable mentions.
Yes,
One
yeah,
of my
so
top
incredible.
honorable mentions. I mean, Wonderful
Yeah.
Life was such a wonderful film.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and that he can do that and Arsenic and Old Lace in the same decade, and they're two incredibly different films, but they're both done the same way, so clear. It's just so clear, and because it's so clearly presented, the writing and the acting can just shine through. And he's a perfect sort of director in terms of that he was like a channel for whatever story he was telling. He would
You know,
just
in
let it
some
come through.
ways, in some ways, directors that do that kind of bug me, especially
Really?
current directors that tell a
Really?
story so logical, methodical. They
Yeah.
follow the arcs. They just go point A to point B to point C to point
Right.
B to point E. Sometimes I get a little perturbed with them because I
get
would
that.
rather like directors that make me think a little bit more.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Frank Capra is one of those guys. I mean, I loved Arsenic and Old Lace. It's my top comedy.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way that he directed that was so much fun.
Yeah.
You had fun watching.
Yeah.
that film.
Absolutely.
In spite of it being dark,
Yeah,
he made it fun.
you know, it's funny that you mentioned that there are directors, like modern directors, that do that are just very logical. One of my favorite modern directors that does that is Chris Columbus, and his films are just they're the same way. It's like glass. You just look through the frame at the picture, and it's not hiding anything from you. It's not muddling anything. It's just like, let me just present it to you. The story is good enough as it is. You'll feel
Yep.
something.
The dialogue
that's-
will lead you through it.
Yeah, and the actors get a chance to just elevate it and to live in it. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that's how I feel. It's the first two Harry Potter films are my
what's your-
favorite of the series.
What is
And-
your favorite Columbus film?
Oh gosh. I mean, genuinely, it might be The Sorcerer's Stone. It really might be.
The second one. That was the second
No,
one.
no,
right?
no, the first one. Yes,
The
the very
first one
first
is
one.
Sorcerer's Stone.
I don't think anyone else
What was
could
the
have
second one?
captured the magic. Chamber of Secrets.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so he did the first two, and they're both so good. And I don't think anyone else could have captured the magic of what that book was for me as a child, other than him. I mean, it was just perfect. And then, of course, there's Home Alone, which I watched again recently because it was the holidays.
He
and-
directed Home Alone?
Yeah, right. It's so good. And what an example of a director like Frank Capra who could do really, really like hilarious slapstick comedy and also something that's so heartfelt. It feels like this journey, like a hero's journey, like what Jimmy Stewart goes through in It's a Wonderful Life. And same thing with Harry Potter. I mean, these directors have a very specific specialty, and it's like so close to my heart that there are these kinds of, clear as glass, see right to the point, but there's a sentimentality maybe that also goes with it. So I get the name Capricorn, but I cherish it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. So Todd, you're on now. Your number one pick for best director of the 40s.
I mean, I have played him on stage, and when I was studying film, I had a professor at UNH who, the first semester there, he was teaching what would be the equivalent of an intro to film from NYU, because he was from NYU. And then subsequently, UNH wanted him to dumb down the course the second year. But we got to be great friends. His name was Peter. And my first year when I was watching black and white films, classic films, I loved them all, and I was getting kind of overwhelmed by all of them. But there was one that stood out to me, and I just sat there stunned through the whole thing, and that was Citizen Kane. So that would be Orson Welles as my number one pick. He, as far as I'm concerned, you look back at the 40s, and I agree with Kate in that the 40s is very much the 70s, and that it was just, the studio system was really revving up, and a lot of amazing, groundbreaking films are coming through. But there was one artist, man, that it was just a hot knife straight through everything that was going on, and that was Orson Welles. I think Citizen Kane, when you watch the filmmaking of it, when you watch Lady from Shanghai, especially the ending with in the House of Mirrors, even Magnificent Ambersons and Macbeth, he is such a punk in terms of how he does his filmmaking. He was, and I love studio filmmaking, but he wasn't going to have any of that. He's like, fuck you, I'm going to see the ceilings. We're going to put cameras in the floors. We're going to play with time. He's so playful in his filmmaking. He's so creative. I love that he came out in the 40s, but at the same time, I feel like he came out so soon in terms of his approach of filmmaking that just the world wasn't ready for the guy. And I think that's why after Citizen Kane came out, which filmmaker, it just cast such a large shadow and influenced so many filmmakers. I mean, even just going into the 50s when Stanley Kubrick started, one of the filmmakers he mentioned was Orson Welles as major inspiration. The reasons why Orson Welles influences filmmakers and artists of all types is not because they're supposed to like Citizen Kane. It's because even when you watch Citizen Kane right now, it's so unique. It's so unique even to like 2022. You watch Citizen Kane, I guarantee you've never seen anything like it before or since. And yes, more of the power was taken away from him as a filmmaker later on, immediately into Magnificent Ambersons, but even more later on, he was chasing after money for the rest of his career. And he has so many lost masterpieces because he was cobbling together pieces of film that he would, that he could at a time. Even in those cobbled together, messes. Sorry, Chase, messes.
You guys weren't, sorry to interrupt, you guys weren't here Friday. That's where his apology comes from.
You still see how just raw and brilliant the guy is. No one else was in his orbit to his own detriment. Was he a massive egotistical dick? Yeah, but his work matched it. You know, there was a reason. And he's one of the most original artists, I mean, let alone filmmakers, one of the most original artists the world has ever seen. I put him up there with, Vincent van Gogh for painting, the Beatles, for music, just as examples. But his artistry transcends filmmaking for me. He's such an artist. And I'm glad Freeman had his personal experience with Citizen Kane last year, because it is an influencing movie. It influences you when you're like at a point where you're sitting there going, I don't have any spark left in me. I'm exhausted. I'm done with all of this. You go back and you can watch Citizen Kane and you see just the raw creativity and the discipline it took for him to make something like that with just such a team around him.
Well, think about the perseverance too. I mean, he had to fight a lot of people, a lot of organizations just to get his work out there. That's why
Randolph Hearst. He's fighting Randolph Hearst.
Oh yeah.
It almost wasn't released, right? Because of that, because it was considered slander, and I mean, it was a written word part, so I'm sure they could get him on libel too.
Yep. He persevered and got his art out there, and what can I say? It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I love how you just spoke about that, just the whole context of it, the comparisons. I knew you were going to mention Vincent van Gogh. I love that. And, I think people in more present time, I think with greatness, people, I don't want to veer too far off on the track, and I have a point here. I think people want to, not all, but many want to take away from that. They want to find something wrong with that. So I know that people are going to listen to this podcast and give you pushback for the Beatles, because and it's like, you cannot undermine the greatness of the Beatles. You just can't. You can sit there and pick it apart, and people do, but I want to see their list of music and what they've done, and what were they sleeping in closets at 17 years old and, touring? I mean, anyway, I'm going off, but people want to minimize and tear apart greatness. And I think with that, Wells definitely falls into that category, and they were constantly trying to rip him apart. But Todd, you bring up such great points, because so many, even to this day, I love, Freeman talking about that. Bogdanovich, Orson ended up being a mentor to him. He said, well, in his interviews, he'll say, well, I was supposed to make a film by the time I was 25, because Wells made his, Kane at 26. So I thought I was a failure because I made my first one. I think he made his first one at like 28. And yeah, he was such an inspiration to so many. And I actually was having a conversation the other day, and I wrote this quote down. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's not going to be verbatim. It's from Kane. Again, I watched this in one of my first, not the first, but one of my first film studies classes. And I loved the quote. I don't remember if it was his lawyer or his publicist. And he's sitting in his office and he said something to the effect of, it's not hard to make a lot of money when what you want to do is make a lot of money. And I think that quote, for anyone that feels like they want to give up, kind of to your point, Todd, with everything going on. And we have it in, even with the craziness of the world aside, in this field, in any field when you're out there on your own and you're trying to forge a new way. It's so easy to give up, but if you want something and that's your sole focus, you're going to get that. So I just loved that quote. It's not hard to make a lot of money when what you want to do is make a lot of money. If you put enough into what you want to do, you're going to get it. I loved that quote. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something about it.
If I didn't mention it before, if you're not familiar with the book My Lunches with Orson, anybody familiar with that?
What is it, Dennis?
Well, a friend of Orson's, I forget his name, had lunches with him on a regular basis, and with his approval, recorded them. And he put them into a book called My Lunches with Orson. And Orson talks about all kinds of fascinating stuff. It's
Cool.
a great book. It's a great book, and it's
Awesome.
very revealing about his life. And he knew everybody, politicians, obviously Hollywood. And it's great. It's really great. It was in the last 10 years of his life, I guess. So he has a pretty good perspective on everything. But check that out. If you like Orson, you'll love that book because it's all him.
Thanks,
Yeah.
I
Dennis.
also,
That's a good point.
I just wanted to interject real quick. And Todd, you put up a good face, but we all know your favorite Orson Welles movie is Transformers, the movie. So
It was the only
let's
one I saw
not
in
even
cinema.
mess around here. It's Unicron, baby.
It was the only one I saw in the cinema, that's for sure.
I
Okay.
love It's Not in This Decade, but Touch of Evil. How great was that film?
Oh my
Yes.
God. Yeah.
Yes. Kate, you're number one.
Now, guys, are we going to come back and do honoraries? Or I
Oh, interdisperse them in there.
okay, because
Yeah,
no
I
one
forgot
does
to
that.
mention them.
So I can, however you want me to do it.
Yeah, well, number one right now, and then we'll come back on honorary mentions.
HMs. So my number one, not ubiquitous within the 40s decade, but I'm sure you guys aren't going to be surprised with my other picks that Charlie Chaplin is my number one.
Fantastic.
I think I talked ad nauseum about Chaplin, so I'm sure there's a way that we can intersperse it into this discussion. But I just think that, and I'm sure you can figure out who my HM is, which would be Orson Welles, obviously. Yeah, I think, and it also goes to the point of possibly not in this decade, but other decades, he could be my number one. Hitchcock as well. I love Chaplin. I love the messages, the two films. Well, he's listed under four, but the two main ones, which was The Great Dictator and Monsieur Verdoux, which I found by happenstance. And I think then I recommended it to Chase, and you fell in love with it, Chase.
Oh, I fell in love with it. What a great film.
I mean, the message, the lines and the messages that come through in those two films, again, today, they're still beyond relevant. They're happening in many ways. Well, not, I mean, yeah. So I just think that he was just a genius, and the fact that he wrote and he starred in and he directed and he composed, and I just, I don't want to go
did
out
everything. He did everything.
I actually scored a couple of Chaplin films from Chase last time he and I were like seeing each other in person. Chase was getting rid of some movies, and I was able
Did we still do that in person thing?
That was the last time we met at Go, and then you were like, "You want some movies?" And I'm like, "Of course I want some movies." So I followed you to your studio, but I was able to snag City Lights and Modern Times from Chase.
Oh, yeah.
And because the only Chaplin I have in my collection is Gold Rush. So I've been looking to expand my Chaplin collection. So those are two finds I was able to snag from him. But I'm still learning about Chaplin. I'm glad you mentioned, Kate, the two Chaplin movies specifically in the 40s that compelled you to pick him to number one, because I don't know a lot about Chaplin. I have a very kind of rudimentary understanding of his work, and I'm been looking to expanded significantly. So this actually helps to know that he's your number one pick of the 1940s. That's great. I appreciate that.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, I think with all of us, like I was saying, I think some of these categories and going through certain years and focuses on just American films, for example, I think it's also pushing me to watch things that I normally wouldn't. But yeah, Chaplin also just, I mean, on a certain level, Harold Lloyd as well kind of dominated the silent film era. Chaplin's, I mean, just genius from what I already mentioned and what he's done, but also the physical comedy. I mean, he's just right up there with one of the greatest of all times, if not the greatest. And yeah, just like I said too, just the subjects that he touched upon are really tough to deal with, and he was able to do it in a way to get the message across, that this is unfortunately humanity, and you see the good and the bad sides of humanity in both of those films, right? And
yes,
yeah, and just such a contrast, and the fact that on many levels some of those things still happen today or could have a tendency to happen today, and it just also signifies his prescient vision, his in touch with what was going on then, and also his genius. So yeah, I hope that, Todd, you get to enjoy some of his other films, Modern Times. That was was it Paulette Goddard? I can't believe I'm forgetting his fourth wife. Those were some of my, she was also in The Great Dictator. They were not married at the time, but there was something about the chemistry between those two that brought out his playfulness. I don't think it was always easy for her, especially with The Great Dictator, because they were no longer together. That's got to be challenging working in that environment. But I think that there's something about those two and their chemistry in Modern Times. And she just has this beautiful playfulness. And of course, you guys probably know that he composed and wrote Smile, which was probably most famously noted not so much for the ending song in Modern Times, but Nat King Cole singing it, you know? So yeah, that's it. Chaplin, number one. Love him. Always and forever.
Okay, Freeman, you're number one.
So actually my number one isn't my favorite director or directors, as it is, of the 40s, which are definitely Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, who made like at least four just home run movies. But I've talked about them a lot, and I will actually mention them later on. But so for my number one, I want to also talk about Preston Sturges, taking a note from Dennis's book,
Wow.
because Preston Sturges hasn't made, of the movies that I've seen of his, he hasn't made one that I absolutely love, but he hasn't made one that isn't objectively a terrific movie. And what's striking is how many of these he made. His career is almost entirely in the 40s.
Yep.
And in 1940, he made Christmas in July, which is really good. The Great McGinty, which is great. And then in 41, he made The Lady Eve and Sullivan's Travels, which are like two of the greatest comedies ever made. And in 42, he made The Palm Beach Story. 44, he made Miracle at Morgan's Creek. Also in 44, he made Hail the Conquering Hero. And then in 48, he made my personal favorite. He made other movies along the way, but he's a real workhorse. But my personal favorite movie of his is Unfaithfully Yours with Rex Harrison, which is this really experimental for the time Black comedy about this guy who thinks his wife's cheating on him, and it's vignettes of like different ways like of getting back at her for it as he's like fantasizing while also conducting an orchestra, and he's like conducting in his mind how to do it. And it's not a perfect movie, but it's an there's incredible style and, again, just experimentation in the filmmaking that when you watch it, thankfully I saw most of these on the Criterion channel. They were doing a thing on Preston Sturges, and Unfaithfully Yours is a really striking movie to finish on, because all of his movies beforehand are these really intricately written madcap comedies that always have a sort of ironic twist at the end, but they're very competent isn't the right word, but they're very like well made, but there isn't a ton of flair to them in the filmmaking. And then Unfaithfully Yours, it's just this really striking departure, and it feels like a real graduation from his previous work. I haven't seen the few movies he made afterwards, but yeah, I think Preston Sturges is one of the most interesting filmmakers ever, because of how bright and short his fire burned.
Which movies of his haven't you seen, Freeman?
I've seen all the ones that I listed, so all the ones that I didn't list, I haven't.
Miracle at Morgan's Creek and Hail the Conquering Hero, you've seen
Yep.
those? Yeah, cool.
Hail the Conquering Hero is my second favorite. Hail the Conquering Hero is great.
I haven't seen Hail the Conquering Hero. Is that good?
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrific. I think it's better than Miracle at Morgan Creek, but I think that's a controversial statement. So,
Well,
Yeah,
we're
there's
here
more.
to make controversy.
You know, the one of the things that I remember from Palm Beach Story watching it that I made an impact on me was in the first part of the film, one of the guys going down the stairs slips and falls, and instead of following him down with the frame, he falls out of frame. And I thought, wow, that was cool. That was a good idea, because all of a sudden, zoop, and he's gone. You know, so yeah, he's one of certainly one of my favorites, and all those films. I'm glad I spaced them out over the years.
I did the exact opposite.
You got to watch them all.
He also did a really interesting thing where he, especially in his writing, which his writing process was he would like essentially perform the entire movie to his secretary who would write it down. So he was just like acting it out with like voices and stuff. And apparently he was really good, but nobody else ever saw him do it. But he gives little characters. I think it's Palm Beach Story. There's a part where it's like they ask a cab driver who's in one scene, like where's the best place to get a divorce or something, and the cab driver just launches into this monologue where he's like, well, if you want it fast and cheap, you can go here, but if you want to get the most bang for your buck, you go there. And it's just this like weird little accent on this throwaway role that completely steals the scene, and his work is filled with that. So yeah,
You know, having Claudette
I need to
Colbert,
catch up on Sturgis. I need to catch up on him.
having Claudette Colbert in Palm Beach Story was
oh yeah.
one of my favorites. Yeah.
Okay, Dennis, you're number one.
Well, this is a tough one. I wanted to revisit John Huston, who's not my number one, but there was a cool quote about him by Peter Flint, who said he shot economically, eschewing the many protective shots favored by timid directors and edited cerebrally so that financial backers would have trouble trying to cut scenes. If only Orson had known more about that technique. But I thought that was cool. Yeah, it's tough to vote against John Huston, Maltese Falcon, Treasure Sierra Madre, Key Largo, we've already talked about. And then it comes, and Orson, tough to go past Orson for all kinds of reasons. But since we're just in the 40s, I think I have to go with John Ford. And the films of his that I've seen and loved: Grapes of Wrath, How Green Was My Valley, My Darling Clementine, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Fort Apache. So three of those are westerns, and two of them aren't. But You know, when Orson Welles was asked for the three greatest film directors, he said John Ford, and John Ford. And you know, I think that said a lot coming from him. Ford was an asshole, and if you watched Peter Bogdanovich's short film interviewing him, you really see it. There was also that story with, and I don't remember what film it was. It had John Wayne in it, which he's in Fort Apache, and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. But anyway, I think it was when Wayne was younger, and Ford asked him, he's in the middle of a shoot, you know, the whole crew's there, and they're setting up the scene and stuff. He says, so, you know, what do you think so far? And John Wayne suckered in and said, I think he asked about a particular character. He goes, well, I think her costume could be a little different. And Ford goes, stop. All right, everybody, come on down. Brings all the people down, all the light down, everybody, all the crew. And he says, Mr. Wayne here doesn't like her costume. You know, and it's like he's going, well, wait, didn't you ask me? And, you know, he took the opportunity to insult and basically put down his actors in a lot of ways. But in some ways, he got good performances out of them, too, by doing that. Now, that wouldn't be my technique because that doesn't work. It works for very few people, but it obviously worked for him. And
there's another way. There's always another way. I got to interject, and that's what most people feel. But I hear you, Dennis.
There's a better way. I mean, you don't have to put artists down to get the best out of them. That's
what I'm saying. There's always a better way. Like to say that that's how he got those performances out of them. I mean, I can name a bunch of directors that do that, and they're not working anymore either. So
sure.
When we get to Kubrick, I'll have words.
Yeah.
So for so long that I'm sure, I mean, directing from 1913, and if you look at his list of films, holy crap, he must have just gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I've seen this a million times, I don't want to see it anymore.
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah, but you don't want that sort of artistic misdemeanor in your midst.
No, you really don't.
You really don't.
It
brings. I think it brings everybody's level down.
Have you all seen Bogdanovich interviewing him, that short film?
So I've like scoured all of Bogdanovich's interviews, documentaries, and Dennis, when I do find it and remember which one, he does discuss that interview, and almost Peter was so, I know people have their opinions about Peter too. He was such like a good-hearted person. Even his falling out with Orson Welles, he excused, and he was like, I love him. I forgave him. It wasn't like his falling out because Orson kind of down talked him on I think on the Tonight Show. But I think he addresses the interview you're talking about on maybe his One Day Since Yesterday. It's a great documentary on Bogdanovich if you haven't seen it. It's heartbreaking, but it's real good. And he might have actually addressed that and almost, don't quote me on this, but I think he kind of explained why Ford was like that. And I think he actually worked with Ford too, didn't he, Dennis?
I don't know other than that film. I forget what it was called. It has John Ford in the name.
Yeah, I think he did it in the 70s, right? Directed by John Ford. Yep, here it is, 1971.
Yep, that's it. Well, I don't know. He obviously admired him. And, Ford, I mean,
yes.
At one point in the interview, Ford gets up and leaves. He said, I'm not answering that question. He gets up and leaves, then he comes back. But, it's... Again, as a human being, I would never pick John Ford, but as a director, it's really tough to overlook those 40s films and other films as well. My Darling Clementine is my favorite Western film because he was really, really meticulous about making sure that everything was historically accurate. And the trilogy, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, Fort Apache, and Rio
Grande.
What?
Wasn't it the Rio Grande?
Rio Grande, yeah. Yeah, that's probably the best one of those, but or no, maybe. Anyway, they're all great, and he created that mystique of the American West. It really didn't exist like that. I mean, the clothing and the sets and everything were accurate, but the whole attitude was really not. But he created that mystique about the American West. Before that, it was all really kind of infantile movies. Westerns weren't considered to be, until Stagecoach, Westerns weren't considered to be serious stories, serious films. Anyway, so yeah, John Ford, and to get to him, I had to leap over Orson and John Huston, and that was tough. And the others I mentioned, Capra, Chaplin, Curtiz, and Hawks. Nobody picked Hawks, but he did some really good films too. And so there you have it. I rest my case.
Good evening. This is Chase Bailey of Left Bank Films. We really hope you enjoyed our podcast, The Love of Film. Tonight's episode was episode 3, which dealt with our favorite directors from the 1940s. For further information about our podcast, please visit leftbankfilms.com/theloveoffilm. Thank you very much.